Hello and welcome back to the YouTube video. Today on 25.21 ADC Tierlist, served your content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There are only a couple of changes this patch. Most notably, we saw a buff towards Kalista, 0.5 AD growth. We also saw the same buff towards Ezreal, another 0.5 AD growth on him. And we saw a buff towards Yunara, trying to incentivize W max over E max. This is primarily because most people in solo queue were still maxing W, competitive players and elite players. I realized that E max second was like a 1% win rate differential and was a bit more performant in those brackets, so they had already shifted over. This should close the gap, makes Emax a lot worse, but makes WMax a lot better as an alternative. For Cogmore, he was generally just too strong for solo queue. He has received early game skewed nerf. It's 5% just across the board on queue. That will mean more in base ranks of queue. The more points you put in, you are going to feel it a bit less, but it's still going to be noticeable later on into the game, so there is some definite power down there. Let's get into it. The D tier is empty. I have removed the champions which were in the D tier because they are now being bumped up to the C tier, and that is Kalista and Yunara. In the case of Kalista, she is doing a bit better. She's still one of the ADCs which I'd probably recommend the least on the list. She's definitely the worst, or one of the worst options, mainly because she's elite skewed, and the fact that you need to put so much time into her to really allow her to catch up with the other marksmen, and that she oftentimes wants specific pairings to be a bit more valuable. Just it makes her not as appealing to kind of incentivize as a champion. In the case of the other champion, which I actually have kind of low towards her, is Varus. Varus obviously has been pretty heavily nerfed at this point because of his competitive power. Lethality Varus in solo queue is just not that great. It takes too long to really get value. Most people won't allow you to have the setup needed to kind of be more valuable than other marksmen within the game. And the on-hit variation just ends up being worse than a lot of the other on-hit marksmen, so he's not that desirable to recommend as a champion. I don't think that he is unplayable. I think the D tier was what I would deem the champions you should probably, for the most part, just completely avoid. And I don't think he's quite that, but he's definitely not one of the He's definitely one of the lower recommendation options. In the case of Yunara, as people gain mastery on her, she'll probably get bumped up to the B tier. She did gain a decent amount from her. Well, she gained something from her adjustments this patch. Not actually that big of a jump in win rate. She still definitely underperforms on win rate rise for solo queue, but that isn't as she is played more and people learn her, she will increase in win rate. That's without a shadow of doubt. She's still going to be relatively fresh on her mastery curve. That happens for a year whenever a champion gets released, and as they are played more, they will the growth and the mastery pool will be better, and she'll increase on that. But right now she sits in the C tier. I don't think she's terrible, and if you want to put time into her, I think she can be quite a rewarding marksman to put time into, but she definitely doesn't perform as one of the top tier solo queue marksmen, and she does innately look to be elite skewed and competitive skewed at the moment, so do keep that in mind when playing the champion. The other picks within the C tier include the likes of Ezreal, who got buffed this patch. It looks more appealing as an option, and the fact that he is gaining if you can look at it by level 10, he has gained 9.5 AD. That is going to be relevant to the champion. That 300, almost 350 gold worth of AD is going to have maybe some conversion spots where you secure a kill, or even just things you gain your +1/+2 CS can be meaningful. These are all kind of things you have to consider when even a champion gets a minor AD bump or an AD growth change. So he's doing better in solo queue. I still don't recommend him that highly. I think he does have a barrier to entry, and he's still not in his best state. I think he has issues with the current itemization system, so I only have him at the top of the C tier, but he's definitely doing better, and he's not quite in the spot where I'd recommend avoiding him. I'm not that big of a fan of Ezreal just generally, but yeah, he becomes a bit more promotable as an option here. The other three picks within the C tier include Corki, who he's definitely he's struggling more now. They've nerfed him a couple of times, primarily his early wave clear and his early strength. like the whole kind of like selling point of Corki is he's a relatively low barrier to entry early game skewed marksman, which is rare. Most early game skewed marksmen, like your Samiras, your Dravens, your Callistas, for example, have a very steep barrier to entry. Corki was kind of the like lower, like more accessible one. And now that he's been nerfed quite a bit, it just makes him not quite appealing to recommend. He needs to really snowball his early advantages to kind of be relevant later on into the game. And if you're just not comfortable with that, then he probably just ends up being a champion you should avoid. But if you are looking for a lower barrier to entry early game skewed marksman, then he's still going to be one of your premier options. Xayah sits in the C tier. She's never been like hugely performant in solo queue outside of like the one instance where like lethality Xayah with like the Q max kind of existed. Other than that, she traditionally ends up being this kind of counter pick reliant champion, and right now she does sit within that state. I don't really like heavily recommend her, but if you find the spots where you are comfortable playing the champion, she could definitely be rewarding, but she ends up being more situational than a lot of the more traditional marksmen, which makes her just not as appealing to kind of recommend as a champion. And then the other pick is Samira. I bumped her down from a B to the C tier. I don't like the gap between like the C tier and the S tier really isn't that big. Like if you are comfortable on a lot of the C tier options, they can quite comfortably compete with like the A and even the S tier options. But they are traditionally going to be picks which are either more innately elite skewed, early game skewed, or champions which just aren't quite as performant at the moment. I think Samira has just like, with other things being buffed around her, just dropped slightly, and she traditionally ends up being kind of reliant on certain pairings to be more valuable. Like you don't want to pair Samira with like an enchanter, as she will just be like, she won't have the tools kind of necessary to be the kind of marksman she wants to be, so she can definitely suffer in that regard. At the B tier then, we lead off with Aphelios. He is a good champion. Like if you want to invest time into a marksman with a pretty unique kind of gimmick and has like a nice mastery curve, I think he's one of the better options you can go to. He scales quite nicely, and he can be quite a good like early game marksman if you are comfortable utilizing the range of your green gun, or I can't remember the name of it. It is why can't I remember Aphelios' names? I'll come to me at some point. But he's definitely like, he's in a rewarding state. That being said, though, he does have that barrier to entry, and that does oftentimes like dissuade people from kind of picking him up. But I do think if you want to put time into him, he can be quite rewarding. But yeah, that barrier to entry does like hamper his placement on the list, so he does sit in the B tier for the moment. Draven, early game skewed, elite, like OTP heavy marksman. Like if you're comfortable with a champion, he will still be your kind of like powerhouse pick. If you're not, then you do need to invest a lot of time into him. You need to be comfortable with like some of the angles of like lethals that he has, because if you're not, then he struggles to get the ball rolling. You need to get takedowns to make this pick effective, and that is kind of like the main point of this champion. Like if you're not comfortable with it, then yeah, he ends up being a lot worse than some of the other options around him. Veigar, it isn't bad. Like, in fact, he could probably even be bumped up to the A tier. He just doesn't translate that well into, like, higher MMR brackets. And I like recommending champs, which I think can, like, serve you well, like, throughout your curve into being just a more consistent or just, like, better player. And I think Veigar just ends up being this pick, which, if you want, like, I don't like using the term temporary LP, because I think just understanding what you can utilize to be able to like win more games in your bracket can be quite valuable, and I think Veigar can definitely be one of those champions. But yeah, the limitations of the pick is he definitely struggles the further up you go, and is limited by the fact that early game you are definitely you don't have the same level of agency. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider with the champion. Jhin is fine. He's slowly been sinking throughout the list. Like I really don't think he's quite as good as maybe he should be. Like I think Jhin is like as his archetype of this not as consistent DPS champion, but higher damage, more utility, is very nice. And yeah, right now I think he just falls below the bar, so I don't really recommend him as much in his current state. But if he does receive buffs, he does become a lot more appealing as like an option. And yeah, he's a fun marksman to play, so if you enjoy him, you want to put time into him, you can still definitely work. But not quite as good as he has been in previous iterations, and not quite as good as some of the like the rest of the roster in its current state. Caitlyn obviously exploded in popularity at Worlds this year. She gained 2 base AD, and obviously that is enough for everyone to go wild over the champion. That being said, obviously it's very relevant for this kind of pick. She is someone who wants to convert early game advantages into being able to like have a lot of gold in late game scenarios, so she can do a lot of damage through those headshots. Like a 3-4 item Caitlyn can, like in a combo, one shot a lot of champions, which is why traditionally when I talk about Caitlyn, it's like I think you should be like comfortable with both styles of the champion. You should be comfortable utilizing your early game range. You should also be comfortable comboing later onto the game and just finding those angles. And I think if you are, then she's a good champion. She can be actually really good in the right spots. If you're not, then she can definitely suffer in some spaces, and I'd probably recommend other marksmen over her. But if you want to invest time into her, I think she's in a perfectly good state too. So yeah, I'd have her in the B tier at the moment. Lucian, obviously, I mean, once again, I like referring to Worlds because obviously it's like the big event currently going on, and like if you're a League viewer or you enjoy League event, you should probably tune in, like watch it. It can be like very valuable and just a fun experience. Lucian obviously is a pretty like fun ADC to talk about because he traditionally does quite badly in the West, but it does, like, as much as obviously competitive is a very different environment, it does kind of present the idea that you need to kind of know your ranges and what you can kind of do with this champion, how you want to approach like mid waves, your combos, and like really exploit the champion for what it can be, rather than just this idea of like a mobility marksman, because he does have a lot of things really going for him. He's not incredible in solo queue at the moment. Like, in fact, like he's sub like the 50% win rate bar, which does obviously mean he's going to be losing more games than he wins. But he is a rewarding champion to sink time into, and I think if you can get really comfortable with the playstyle, he's a great pick. Like, he's a great champion to have investment into. So I have him in the B tier at the moment, but once again, he's one of these picks where if you put the time into them, they can be very rewarding. Zeri, in a bit of a weird spot at the moment, where in the past, she was more of this, like, sustained damage, like, marksman with a unique kind of, like, way of, like, outputting her damage through, like, the Q rather than the auto attacks. That being said, though, in her current iteration, she kind of feels a bit more, but, like, she's definitely been pushed more towards being a lot more bursty, which, if you enjoy that kind of play pattern, I think can be fine. Like, she's, I'd honestly say, in a pretty solid spot at the moment. But she also, like a lot of the B and C tier options, does have that barrier to entry. And she traditionally feels a bit inconsistent, I guess you could say, if not paired with the right things. Like, she traditionally wants, I mean, like the Yuumi is still one of her best performing duos, but even some of the other enchanters and some of the engage options can feel a bit better and like more performant with the champion. But I think it's about understanding like what you can do within the game, and like if you are able to take on that responsibility, yeah, I think she's a pretty solid pick. If you're not, then she can definitely struggle in certain spots. The A tier then. So we lead off with some of your AP options, your Swains, your Seraphines. I think I have one more. Actually, no, I had 2 more, Mel and Ziggs. In the case of Swain, I think is a conditional kind of option to lean into. He can be quite good. If you don't play the pick, though, you're probably not going to just like suddenly pick it up. It's not gonna like a steep barrier to entry, but you do want to have had some games to kind of feel comfortable with the spots you want to play him in and how kind of like the kit functions. In the case of Seraphine, the recent buffs really helped her. She kind of, once again, is this jack of all trades, like solid, just AP option in the support, in the bot lane role. In the case of Mel, the like also the recent buffs for Mel have been like very helpful for her. But I say this like every video I talk about Mel. If you max Eon this champion, she is like a tier stronger. She's in a really strong state at the moment, but people don't max her correctly, and it is a genuine, like, pretty heavy win rate drop. So keep that in mind when playing the champion. I'll keep mentioning it until like either Riot end up doing something where they like push her back to being Qmax, like as her strongest variant, or people always see like a huge shift over to Emax. Only time will tell in that regard. In case of Ziggs, I think he's just a good AP bot option. Like, if you want an AP bot laner, then Ziggs is, I would say, a really nice go-to. He's not my number one. Obviously, Hui is my number one. I think Hui is actually just like almost like OP. I mean, he's probably just blatantly OP in the bot lane role at the moment. But he also does have that like barrier to entry. But Ziggs, yeah, I think he can be just a perfectly good default option. He's also like obviously deemed as the probably most accepted like bot lane mage option, so I mean, obviously, it's like now you're going into like the mental of people in solo queue, but it's like he will be accepted more by your support a lot of times. So I guess that's another win for the champion in that regard. Some of your like solo queue, I mean, I say some of your, I mean, in the solo queue orientated space, Twitch still like he's. I could honestly drop Twitch to the B tier, and it probably wouldn't make much of a difference at the moment. Like he's like a lower A tier option, but that's not to say he's bad by any means. I think he really exploits the solo queue environment, and traditionally you would just see like your OTPs playing Twitch. So if you're comfortable with the champion, I think he still like functions quite nicely as a marksman. He's not one of my top recommendations. I prefer like recommending picks which I think can be like not so reliant on being like OTP to kind of understand them and like have like transferable skills. I think Twitch like breaks the mold on that, and he like obviously plays into a different archetype rather than just like the traditional marksman play style. That being said though, I do have like Yasuo and Neela like around this tier as well. I mean Yasuo is really good at the moment. He's been pretty solid for a while. In fact, across like almost like across, well, I mean mid he's good as like an AD option, but he's like he's up there as like one of the best options you can go to for like a melee bot laner, and he's also like obviously one of the more like accepted ones, and even in top lane as like a counter pick, he's pretty solid state at the moment. Like if you enjoy him as like a flex option, I think he can be quite rewarding here. If you haven't put time into him though, you're probably not going to be playing Yasuo bot lane, but if you're like comfortable, you're with the champion, and you're like comfortable with some of the pairings you want to like opt into the pick with, then yeah, I think he can be a very solid champion to bring out every so often. Nyla, also another pick which I think if you're comfortable with some of the pairings and you're comfortable with the play pattern, can be quite a good champion. In fact, a really good champion. Like both these two can be really good options, but they're the kind of picks where if you haven't put time into them, they're probably champions you don't consider, because yeah, they do have some level of mastery curve, and they are unique in the way they function compared to some of the other more traditional marksman options. Senna sits within the A tier. I think you can honestly go both the Enchanter-esque like build on Senna, or just the more utility-centric, or like the damage-centric variants, like various variations of Senna which kind of exist at the moment. I think the pick is fine. I think the pick's quite good. It's a utility option within the marksman role. If you enjoy leaning into that playstyle, I think that can be quite a good champion for you. I'd rate her above Jhin. I think that's like the reason I have Senna in A and Jhin in B is I just rate Senna higher than Jhin at the moment as like this utility option you can lean to. Probably not my premier. That's probably Ashe at the moment, but she definitely like sits up here as like one of the like better ones on the list. Tristana, I'm like monitoring Tristana at the moment. She doesn't seem to be spitting out a particularly good win rate in solo queue at the moment, at least not like since like last time I checked. I still think the champ's good though. Like, not to say I suddenly think the champ's bad. She does a lot of damage. She scales quite well. Has really nice all-in angles. I think she serves a pretty like solid audience of players, and yeah, I'd say generally she sits in the A tier, but she's a champion I'm kind of watching at the moment because yeah, if she continues to like not have great like numbers or like win rate, then there might be something like underlying there, maybe like an item choice or just like a decision people are making, and I'll like come back to you in the next video with like a more deep analysis on why this champion's suffering. But for the moment, as far as I can see, yeah, I think the pick's still like a good champion. Sivir, the recent nerfs just brought her down to a more reasonable level. I think if you're looking for a relatively solid, wave clear, scaling, like traditional marksman option, she fits quite nicely in that like space, and yeah, I'd say she's a solid A tier option at the moment. And the other two A tier options are Kai'Sa, who honestly might even be bumpable up to the S tier. I see a lot of situations where it's like Kai'Sa's not a great champion because she suffers a lot in lanes, but then what you'll often see with Kai'Sa is even if she suffers a lot in lane, she'll go down like maybe 10 to like even 30 CS and like coming out at like 15, and then she can find these spots in fights where she's really valuable, able to get multiple takedowns, and that's like how she like shows her value. And if you can get her in like lane winning situations, or you're just like winning lane with the champion, she still looks like good, like really good as an option. So definitely something to consider in that space. She obviously is going to be incredibly popular. She is that is just the style of champion she is, and yeah, right now I think she's top of the A tier. Honestly, like if you put a lot of time into the champion, she's probably like one of your premier options at the moment. And then Vayne, I think Vayne's in a really good state at the moment. Generally, with other things being nerfed around her, some of her items getting a bit better for her, she seems to have really found her footing within the ADC role at the moment. And yeah, I'd say she's probably one of the premier, like, solo queue-esque champions, like the traditional, like, the 1v9 kind of archetype where you have this, like a lot of individual power. And yeah, I think she slots in quite nicely with the other A-tier options. So the S tier then, I've dropped Cogmore down. He's more in line with some of the, like, more like high-end marksman now. I still think the champ's really good, and I have accepted the fact that Cogmore just has to be good to maintain a player base, and I think that's fine for the pick. I think if you want to, like if you like the niche marksman, you just want to opt into him as like a hyper carry in certain situations, I think he can be quite rewarding in that regard. Wei is still my number 1 mage. I really like him as an option. Great wave clear, great scaling, decent early, pretty hard to assail in a lot of situations with some of the self-peeling tools. Obviously, you lack the mobility that some of the some other champions provide, and you also have a barrier to entry. But I still think in the right situations, he's an incredibly good AP option. And I think people are generally start to catch on. People have known for a while that Hui's very good, and like his recent buffs just solidified him as probably my premier AP option and like recommendation. Other picks within the S tier include the likes of MF and Ashe, who are very low barrier to entries, and it makes them quite nice, just like recommendation picks. I think MF, if you pair alongside an engage support and just like CC setup, she's really good in that space, and generally her play pattern is just quite nice to kind of be like accessible. In the case of Ashe, she's my premier utility option, being able to provide vision, slows, having great initiation with the ultimate. Just gives her a lot of tools to kind of get things done, and her damage is obviously going to be less than other marksmen around her, but it's nothing to like shy away from. Like if you're ahead and if you're able to kind of like forge your own advantage, she does do a lot of damage. So this kind of pick, I still recommend her as like one of my premier S tier options. And then Smolder, great scaling, always being able to, like, if you can consistently reach your breakpoints and you're good at like the stacking mini game, and even before like you reach the 225 mark, he can still dish out a lot of damage. Like this champion, I think generally in the current state of the game is pretty good, and if you can find the spots where you want to play him, whether that's into these like more frontline heavy compositions or enemy team doesn't have a great amount of lockdown, he can feel really valuable in those situations. So maybe not the kind of pick you want to like opt into like broadly, but generally like if you find the high HP kind of like low lockdown, low burst compositions, he really shines in those spaces. So yeah, definitely gonna say it as like one of my S tier options. And then Jinx back to number 1. Cogmore dropping out the S plus tier kind of allows her to just shine as this like premier marksman option. She just does a lot of what you want for a solo queue champion. She snowballs really nicely, scales really nicely. Not even like that bad early on into the game. Like if you can like set yourself up for success, she generally is like in a very good state for that kind of space of the game. So just a all-round purpose, like, or I mean, I say all-round purpose. She does obviously is like have the limitation of like the lack of mobility and she is just like the traditional marksman archetype, but that does allow her to be very good at what she does. So yeah, Jinx I think still sits as my premier marksman option at the moment, and I think solo queue like reflects that. She is the like number 1 most popular marksman, I believe, at the moment. I need to fact check that because it might be Kaiser. I just know Jinx was like is usually you ready? It is, yeah, it's Kaiser at the moment. Of course it is. Wait, if I'm curious because I actually want to look at this. All ranks, it's Caitlyn. Jinx is number 3. Jinx usually sits towards the top. Obviously, like when Arcane is like the thing, then yeah, she was at the top. But it does look like Caitlyn with recent buffs, and yeah, Kaiser in her current state. It all seems to be like very popular, and they usually are, even when they're like weak champions. But that's just something to note. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.